Hi, Alexander. Am I audible to you?
Hello, can you hear me?
Good to see you.
Nice to see you as well. 1 second, I'm just granting you access for recording from my computer. I've got to come out and come back in so it accepts the recording. 1 second.
All right.
And Rahul, you please tell everybody that everybody should mute themselves.
Yes, sure, Sandeep, sir. How are you, sir? How are you doing?
Fine. Wonderful.
I would request all the participants to just mute their systems. Thank you so much.
মামুন তোমার স্ক্রিনটাকে বন্ধ করো। You should not share your screen. Thank you.
डिटेल अपना IBBI का नंबर कितना है?
I would request everyone to mute themselves, please. I request everyone to mute themselves. Thank you once again. We are just about to start the session.
Hi,
Just
Ron.
check.
Nice to see you.
Hi, Sandy. How are you doing? Can you hear
Ron
me?
has joined.
Can you hear me, Sandeep? All good?
Yeah, I can hear you. I just see Ron. Ron just has joined from Israel.
Ah, brilliant. Shalom, Ron. Nice to see you.
Hello, hi everyone.
Nicholas, Kim has not yet joined, I believe.
I was just in a call with Kim 4 minutes ago. I know that he is joining, so
Okay.
hopefully he's not getting any technical difficulties. I'll just check my email, but I've got nothing new from Kim in relation to that, so I think it should be fine.
Sandeep sir, so how much time do we have to wait, or shall we start the session?
Let us start because the first slides will be presented. Let us wait for another
So-
5 minutes. At 5 past 4, we'll start. Let us wait for another 3 minutes for Kim.
Sure. We'll do that.
Sandeep, can you reach out to Kim on WhatsApp? Because I know he's joining us. Just check that he's not having any difficulties.
I'm checking.
I'm here, guys. Can you hear me?
Oh, brilliant. Got
Yeah,
you.
brilliant. Hi, Kim. We are all waiting for you.
Excellent.
Nice to see you.
Finally, we see you.
Yeah.
Good to see you
So,
again.
Without wasting
Ram,
much of the time, yes, I'll just hand over the session. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar that is on IVSC's perspective paper on inspection that is hosted by Assessors and Registered Valuer Organization. I am Rahul Sharma, Chief Administrative Officer in AARVF. And for today's session, the moderator for the session will be, I think everybody knows, will be Sandeep Kumar Dev, sir. He's a Director RV of our organization. And I'm excited to introduce our esteemed panelists, who will be sharing their insights and expertise on this important topic. So joining us today are Kim Hildebrand and Alexander Aronson. The more details, I think Sandeep sir would be able to introduce them much better. The topic a little bit about the perspective paper on inspection that will be exploring the importance of inspection in the valuation process. The paper will highlight the challenges and the limitations of inspection as well as the best practices for ensuring accurate and reliable results. So without wasting much of the time, but at the end of the session, we'll also have a Q&A session at the end of the session. So feel free to ask those questions. And without wasting, much of the time, Sandeep sir, I'll hand over the session to you.
Thank you very much, Rahul. And good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everybody throughout the globe. Because now I'm happy to say that people have joined from all over the globe, not only all over this country or this subcontinent, rather they have joined from all corners of the globe. Well, before we go further, I would like to request everybody, kindly mute yourself. Kindly mute yourself because this is the meeting version. Amit ji, could you please mute yourself? Sorry. Thank you so much. Everybody, please mute yourself. Otherwise, it is difficult to proceed further. Please, huh? So that Inderji, please mute yourself. Inder Raj Singh, please mute yourself. Rahul, you do one thing. You mute everybody.
सर ये
and then
इधर से
unmute me.
म्यूट हो नहीं रही, प्लीज उधर से कर दो, उस तरफ से कर दो, मेरे से हो नहीं रहा है इधर से।
Sir, kindly mute yourself, sir.
सर मैं
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Surya Narayana, please mute yourself. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. Sorry. Let me tell everybody that for the last few years, it is echoing that for the last few years, Tangible Asset Board, we people in the Tangible Asset Board and IVSC, we are working hard to come to a solution about inspection. Because inspection is such an important topic in valuation. That all over the world, it is a necessity that Tangible Asset Board as a part of International Valuation Standard Council.
ઈમાં તો પેલું આજે કબજા માટેનું જે છે
હા એમાં છે ને આપણે એવું કરશું કે ત્યાંના છે ને માસ્ટર મામલતદાર મારા પરિચિત છે, બરોબર, અને ત્યાંનો સ્ટાફ મારફતે ટૂંક એને કેવડાવશું પહેલા, અને પહેલા હવે આપણે અંદર આપણે રેકોર્ડ ઉપર આવી ગયા છે એટલે આપણે છે ને પેલા માપણી માટેની આપણે એક તૈયારી
Rahul, please.
માપણી કરી અને ફેન્સિંગ કરાવવા માટે
Sir, kindly mute yourself, sir.
બરોબર, સામે આવશે એટલે આપણે સ્ટાફ મારફતે કેવડાવીશું કે ભાઈ બોલો ભાઈ આ, એટલે બહુ આપણે છે ને એને જે આપણે કેટલું તમારે આપણે કેટલી ગણતરી છે મિનિમમ થી
એવું તો આપણે છે ને આવ્યો હતો ને
કદાચ એ કઈ આવ્યું હોય તમને ફિગર કોઈ જાણવા મળી હોય
પાર્ટનર હતા ને એ થોડા પેલા વ્યવસ્થિત હતા એમ છે ને જે થોડો આવ્યો હતો ને પકડાઈનો વાત
હા
Sandeep, is there a button where you could just mute everyone? There should be a control button where you mute everyone who's talking. I can't seem to find it.
राहुल सर, ऐसा लगता है कि लोग खाली ज्वाइन किए हैं और अटेंड नहीं कर पा रहे हैं या अटेंड करना नहीं चाह पा रहे हैं, तो प्लीज ऐसे जन को आप एग्जिट मार दीजिए। एज एडमिनिस्ट्रेटर यू कैन डू इट, या एज एडमिनिस्ट्रेटर आप सबको म्यूट कर दीजिए, फिर जिन जन ने बोलना है वो अनम्यूट कर पाएंगे अपने को। थैंक यू, दैट वाज जस्ट अ रिक्वेस्ट।
Thank you very much. So finally, we have been able to start. Well, I know that people are very enthusiastic to talk. You will get every chance to talk and to question because our panelists will be there with us. Well, let me tell you that Tangible Asset Board have been thinking over the matter because it's a very gray point. Many people are thinking that with the advent of technology and different kinds of intention to use, the necessity of inspection is not there. Some people are thinking, no, inspection, physical inspection is a must. So Tangible Asset Board has decided, let us go for it. Let us prepare one perspective paper. So a research work has been done and the And the perspective paper, the first one in this series, has been published. And now it is in the domain of everybody. You can download the perspective paper. And I believe that you all have already downloaded the perspective paper on inspection. And that is why from Assessors and Registered Valuers Foundation, we have invited two most experienced persons in the world, I should say, who work deeply on the matter of inspection. Well,
Audio is
you
disturbing.
know that in tangible asset, we have both land and building as well as infrastructure and plant and machinery. So today we have two very eminent valuers. One has got his expertise mainly on land and building, that is real estate, and other one is one of the greatest expert in the field of infrastructure and plant and machinery. On behalf of everybody, I would like to welcome Mr. Alexander Aronson, the Technical Director of the International Valuation Standard Council, and Mr. Kim Hindabad, the Chairman of the Tangible Asset Board of International Valuation Standard. Well, you all know that whatever is nowadays is done in international valuation standards, technical director plays the pivotal role. Whether it is a tangible asset matter, whether it is an intangible asset matters, you will find the name of the Alexander everywhere. So we are really happy to have today Alex with us. And Kim is the leader of the Tangible Asset Board. He is from Australia, and he's working in the Valuer General's office in Australia, Victoria. So without wasting any more time, I would now request Alex to take the job, take it forward. Alex, please.
Thank you, Namaste, and thank you very much for inviting both Kim and myself here to give you this presentation. I'm just getting the slides, hopefully in the presentation format, so hopefully you can all see them at the moment. So we're very honoured to be here, and to be honest with you, this is our first presentation on this perspective paper. And we're honoured to provide it to you. And Sandeep is very modest as well. He's also the Vice Chair of the Tangible Assets Board and has been very deeply involved in the drafting of this perspective paper. So the perspective paper was published on June 2024, and the focus is on inspection of tangible assets within the valuation process, and it includes consultation questions. So during the course of this presentation and at the end of the presentation, I will talk you through the consultation questions. If you scan the QR code, you will be given direct access to the website where you can respond to the questions. And we'd be very grateful if you could provide us feedback by the 31st of July. Inspection papers serve a number of purposes. They are a way to engage the market on key issues such as inspections, and in some instances, they may also be a precursor to future standard setting in revisions in the next edition of IVS. So it's very important that you participate in this so we understand the market needs. So the focus of the perspective paper is very much the inspection of the tangible assets within the valuation process. And with rapid technological advancements and changing practices, particularly highlighted during the COVID-19 pandemic, where an inspection was not always possible, the necessity and methodology of physical inspections have come under scrutiny. And the paper tries to explore this evolving landscape of valuation inspections. It looks at the benefits and challenges of various inspection types, from traditional physical inspections to technology-based virtual inspections, assessments. And one of the challenges that we've got, that Kim will talk you through later, is we all use the word inspection, but we often have a different meaning behind it. So what the client is seeing as the inspection and what the valuer is seeing as the inspection is not necessarily the same thing. And so from a tangible assets perspective, physical inspection is an important pillar of helping to minimize certain elements of valuation risk. And valuation risk, you will notice, is a defined term in the latest edition of IVS. And by way of physical inspection, this often provides valuers and users of valuations with various opportunities and insights, which could include confirmation of the existence of an asset. Sometimes anyone can produce an Excel sheet with a lot of names and addresses on it and some numbers, but sometimes the valuer actually needs to confirm that the asset exists. And also a greater appreciation to the technical or physical characteristics of the asset. Are there improvements? Are there building works needed? A greater awareness of the asset's condition, potential and/or limitations. An understanding of the asset's operational capability, past, present or future, understanding the asset's locality, surrounds and development potential, an opportunity to discuss the asset with management or operational personnel, and the ability to inspect market comparable sales within proximity to the asset. So you might be looking at your comparables and saying, how similar are they to the actual asset I'm valuing? How comparable are they? And we're quite clear within IVS, and you can see here a direct quote from IVS 101, scope of work requirements. And the scope of work must specify the following: the nature and extent of the valuer's work and any limitations thereon. Any limitations or restrictions on the inspection, inquiry and or analysis in the value must be identified. So this is mandatory within IVS. And if relevant information is not available because of the conditions of the valuation restrict the investigation, these restrictions and any necessary assumptions or special assumptions made as a result of the restriction must be identified. And this is further elaborated in IVS 102, basis of value, paragraphs 50.01 to 50.04. And within IVS 300, 400 and 410, so that's the tangible assets chapter, IVS 300 is plant, equipment and infrastructure. Please note that infrastructure is now specifically added to the standard. IVS 400 is real property interest and IVS 410 is development property. And all of them state sufficient investigations and evidence must be assembled by means such as inspection, inquiry, research, computation or analysis to ensure that the valuation is properly supported. And when determining the extent of investigations and evidence necessary, professional judgment is required to ensure it is fit for the purpose of the valuation. And we actually define professional judgment within the standard as well. So please have a look at that definition of professional judgment. We state that it's the use of accumulated knowledge and experience, as well as critical reasoning to make an informed decision. So we also state within the tangible assets chapters, and remember when you're following IVS, you need to follow all the general standards. So that's IVS 100 to IVS 106, and you also need to follow the particular asset standards in relation to your discipline. And it states very clearly, if during the course of an assignment, it becomes clear that the investigations or limitations included in the scope of work will not result in a credible valuation, or information to be provided by third parties is either unavailable or inadequate, or limitations on investigations such as inspection are so substantial that it will not result in a valuation outcome that is adequate for the purpose of the valuation, the valuation must explicitly state that the valuation is not in compliance with IVS. So when you're looking at compliance, you've really got to think about whether the limitations to investigations such as inspection are so substantial that it would not result in a valuation outcome that is adequate for the purpose of the valuation. And just moving forward, it goes further in IVS 106, documentation and reporting. We specifically state that valuation reports must convey the following at a minimum: the agreed scope of work, the sources and selection of significant data, and the inputs that are actually used. So as such, the positioning of IVS promotes transparency in relation to inspection. For an IVS compliant valuation, we don't mandate physical inspection, but you need to be transparent about the type of inspection that you do, and you need to make sure that the level of inspection is appropriate for the asset that you're valuing. And while it would be widely acknowledged that an inspection is commonly part of a tangible asset valuation process, it is only one of many ways for the valuer to conduct investigations and assemble evidence with the intention of ensuring that the valuation is properly supported. So professional judgment is really required when determining the extent of investigations and evidence necessary, and the valuer should clarify why the chosen type of inspection, and we're going to go through an inspection classification in a minute that will show you different types, is best fit for the intended use in order to provide an IVS compliant valuation. So this is what IVS specifically says in relation to inspection. And I'm now going to hand you over to Kim, who is going to hopefully talk you through the perspective paper. So over to you, Kim.
Thanks, Alex. So I think, as Alex has already touched upon, I think there's a significant amount of professional judgment when it comes to the topic of site inspection in relation to tangible asset valuations, and encapsulated within that heading is that inspection can mean different things to different stakeholders as part of the valuation process. If we consider that topic alone, it can create a level of frustration from both valuers and clients alike, in that when quoting to undertake valuations, valuers scope different forms of inspection within their fee estimates, potentially create an unlevel playing field as part of the tendering process for a less informed client. And upon receiving a valuation, a client can often be left feeling unsatisfied with the level of inspection conducted during the assignment and the resulting investigation and diligence, because it was not what they anticipated. So when we were discussing this topic at the Tangible Assets Board, we kept coming back to this very topic, in that inspection can indeed mean different things to different people, whether you're a valuer as part of the valuation process, or if you're a client accepting the valuation on behalf of a key stakeholder. When we actually went through it and considered that level of or the lack of clarification of inspection and it meaning different things to different people, we tried to get down on paper, well, what are the different types of inspection classifications that people might undertake to create this disparity with how people think about inspection in valuation. And we come up with 5 high-level types of inspections that people might bundle an inspection process into. The first one was desktop inspections, and that is where a valuer uses applications like Street View applications like Apple Look Around or Google Street View, or dated photographs to consider an asset or a property or check relative comparables. And whilst this has its shortcomings for current valuations because of the dated nature of the information, it can be somewhat helpful when conducting valuations with a retrospective valuation date, or when valuing large portfolios of assets that are geographically dispersed. The second type of inspection classification that we thought of was technology-based virtual inspections. Now, with the advent of the COVID pandemic in a number of jurisdictions, there was a real lack of people being able to attend site to undertake inspections. And that, what happened during that time is there was a rapid evolution of technology in relation to inspections, whereby a number of valuation service providers were utilising technology that was on site at an asset's location to be able to do some form of real-time inspection of the asset using technology. So they would still be based at their desk, but a client or another representative that was actually based at the location of the asset was able to use technology to assist the valuer in conducting a technology or virtual-based inspection. The third type of inspection that we come up with was what is commonly termed a drive-by or a curbside inspection. And that is where the valuer typically doesn't set foot on the property itself, but typically inspects the property from afar, either from a vehicle or from the curb. And whilst viewing the asset in person has its obvious advantages, such an inspection still might fail to gather certain information that's associated with an asset or a property. And indeed, some people might consider a drive-by inspection to be exactly just that, driving past an asset at 60 kilometres an hour in their car. The fourth type of inspection that we could come up with, or the fourth bundle of inspection type, was a detailed inspection. And that is typically where a valuer physically enters the property to undertake a thorough inspection of the property or of the asset and its associated improvements. It will often involve an internal inspection of the property, and it will frequently offer the valuer an opportunity to ask questions about a property's history, its condition, and its operational status. So such an inspection can often offer up insights that are associated with a property that may not be discovered as part of a desktop or technology-based virtual inspection or a drive-by inspection. So it is a more rigorous type of inspection, if you would like. The fifth type of inspection is what we termed a critical inspection, and that is whereby a valuer does everything that's associated with that described within a detailed inspection, but they also complement that with the use of other specialists such as structural or environmental engineers, building surveyors, planning experts, quantity surveyors and cost engineers, asset management personnel, legal, taxation professionals, or other operational experts, for example. So these specialists provide additional levels of insurance around the focus areas of the valuation and remove the need to limit certain aspects of the valuation that Alex was alluding to before when thinking about risk or overall governance or engagement risk around valuation. So as we go through each of those 5 different inspection types and classifications, you can understand that different people that quote to do an inspection as part of a valuation could indeed be talking about very different things if we're thinking about a desktop inspection all the way through to a critical inspection of the property. And that creates that unlevel playing field that we're alluding to in the previous slide, both from a client's perspective in terms of what they're looking to receive as part of a valuation, but also an unlevel playing field for people that are coming to the table and as part of a tendering process. And they may indeed be quoting different forms or classifications of inspections when they are saying as part of that valuation that they'll be conducting an inspection. Next slide, please, Alex. The additional layer that we put over the top of all those 5 different inspection classifications that we come up with there is the concept of sample inspections. And where you have large portfolios or high volumes of assets, the valuer may also have agreed to undertake a sample inspection of that portfolio of assets. And the selection of the sample may revolve around different criteria that might include high value assets, it might include asset type, location, vintage, or random sampling. But typically, it's to get a holistic view of what that sample of assets looks like. Any of the types of inspections that were described above, or the classifications, may be combined as part of that sampling inspection process, or indeed you may do a detailed inspection for some assets, but a drive-by inspection for other samples of assets within the portfolio. So it's typically utilised where you have really large and significant portfolios of assets that are associated with the valuation. Next slide, please. So I think in summary, whilst all of these might be considered an inspection, either from a client or a valuer, the wide variety of different inspection types can create a lack of clarity amongst valuation stakeholders, but it results in a divergence of valuation products potentially being delivered to the market because of that lack of consistency with how we describe inspection as part of the valuation process. Next slide, please. So the question that a lot of you might be asking, or indeed some of you, is that why don't valuers just undertake a detailed inspection for all valuations? And this is a real challenge for a global valuation standard setter, in that not all valuations are the same. Valuations for tangible assets that are covered within IVS plant and equipment standards and real property standards actually cover a vast variety of asset classes. Okay, below are some of the variables that may influence the valuer's decision regarding the extent of the inspection that's required as part of the valuation process. They need to consider the asset class that is subject to the valuation. They need to consider the portfolio size that the valuation is subject to, the geographic dispersion of the assets that are involved in the valuation, the nature or the size of the assets. They may be large in nature and geographically dispersed. Some valuers might consider the nature of recurring valuation. So if they're to undertake a valuation on the same asset on a recurring basis, what do they think about inspection around that type of recurring valuation? The valuation purpose is an important thing to consider as part of the valuation. Some valuations have a heightened risk relative to other valuations. And so either the classification of the inspection that is undertaken or the random nature or sampling of that process might be part of the consideration when considering the valuation purpose. Valuers come to the table to do valuations for a whole variety of different purposes. And so whilst you as an individual might just be tasked typically with doing a valuation of a single asset class for a single purpose, many other valuation professionals come to the table and do valuations for a wide variety of asset classes over a wide variety of geographic regions for a wide variety of different purposes. And so, from the perspective of an international base standard setter, that creates some challenges because standards need to also cater for that audience. And we also have there as the last bullet point, the prospect of inaccessible assets. And so when you have a subsea pipeline, how do you think about inspection for a subsea pipeline? Or indeed where you have, for example, assets that might be located out at sea. How do you think about the inspection for assets that are largely inaccessible? So a wide variety of reasons that we have there as to why valuers don't just undertake detailed inspections for all valuations, but having consideration to all of that as well. Budget for clients to undertake valuation assignments is finite, but in considering budget for all assignments, that needs to be managed commensurate to the risk that's associated with the valuation, and the product delivered needs to be appropriate for its intended use. Next slide, please. Do inspection requirements differ amongst jurisdictional settings? So I think, without elaborating in greater detail as part of this call, the IVSC perspectives paper does go into some detail with some sample jurisdictional settings regarding inspections, but it would appear that inspection requirements do vary amongst jurisdictional settings around the world, and perhaps rightly so. For example, in some countries, the lack of suitable asset information may mean that valuers need to rely more heavily on collecting information during the inspection process to ensure that their valuations are adequately supported. And so if you are in a jurisdiction that has a high level of fraud or crime, absolutely there might be a really high requirement for valuers to do a detailed inspection as part of the valuation process. Other countries might have more stringent inspection policies related to valuations for certain purposes, where levels of risk are elevated and valuers need to consider that in those particular jurisdictions. But that will be imposed by statutory legislation or regulatory authorities within those jurisdictions. So again, a wide variety of jurisdictional settings as we look around the globe. Our overarching observations in terms of that variance of inspection around the world is that the scope of work may limit the requirement for an inspection in some countries. There is no common interpretation, definition, or classification among stakeholders as to what an inspection actually is. The valuation purpose and nature of the asset class will often inform the extent or nature of the inspection process. Professional judgment will typically be required by the valuer to determine the extent or nature of the inspection. But in some jurisdictions, VPOs, for example, may request their members to undertake inspections in those particular countries, but they may not be legally mandatory to follow. In other jurisdictions, though, a regulator may enforce an inspection for a specific valuation purpose or asset class, making it a legal requirement. Finally, to wrap out there, the physical inspection of an asset may be a mandatory requirement as part of the terms and conditions of a firm's professional indemnity insurance. And so, again, looking at the wide variety of considerations there, really, really strong professional judgment needs to be considered around all of these things when thinking about the level or extent of an inspection that's necessary as part of the valuation process. If we go on to the next slide, we present, in order to promote transparency around valuation, we present within the perspectives paper an example inspection classification form that we think, combined with a detailed inspection classification system that we went through before with the 5 levels of inspection classification, an example form that could be included for transparency as part of a valuation process, not only within the valuation report itself, but potentially up front as part of a scope of work. And we've put this forward because we think that promoting greater transparency is part of the scope of work, but then also as part of the valuation report would help create a greater level of trust as part of the valuation process. So you see within this valuation form that we've presented within the perspectives paper that the valuer would tick that they have conducted a detailed inspection for all assets as part of that valuation. They note that all the assets that are the subject of the valuation have been inspected, and they provide additional inspection information or disclosure around when each of the assets that are subject to that valuation were inspected and the date that they were inspected on. And so we think this greater level of transparency as part of the scope of work and as part of the valuation reporting process could be a real benefit for the valuation profession to create a greater level of transparency in relation to this particular topic. Next slide, please. So I think, as Alex alluded to before, when we've brought all of these things to the table, considering and in the round and considering that we are indeed a global standard setter that has to apply across all jurisdictions and across a wide variety of different asset classes, there is no doubt around the Tangible Assets Board that there is general agreement that a physical inspection is an important part of the valuation process. When Alex was alluding in the earlier slides, as alluded to there, it helps reduce various elements of risk around a valuation process and informs the valuer in making that valuation process. But because of the vast variety of asset classes, jurisdictions, and valuation purposes, the Tangible Assets Board did remain firmly of the view that the primary role of the IVSC in and around inspection and valuation was to promote transparent and consistent standards for all stakeholders, not that one individual doing a particular type of value and a particular type of asset class for a particular purpose could adhere to, but that people all around the world valuing all different types of tangible assets for all different purposes could come to the table and adhere to the IVS. And so it was our overall conclusion that we didn't think that was our role to act as the mandatory gatekeeper for valuation inspection requirements. We thought that that was best done at the VPO level or at the regulator level in those jurisdictions, but that our role was primarily to promote transparency and consistency in and around valuation standards, and hence why we've put forward an inspection classification regime. And, you know, the potential call to create greater transparency as part of describing that inspection process as part of the scope of work and the reporting process of valuation.
So one very important part of this is the inspection perspective paper comes with questions. And before we open the panel and hear your questions that we'll be very happy to respond to, you'll see that we have these questions here to help us give us more detail. And I would urge you all to scan the QR code that is shown there. It will give you access to the questions, but we're really asking 6 questions. One, what are the requirements within your jurisdiction in relation to tangible assets valuation inspection? And what standards or guidance do you follow? And it'd be very helpful if you could tell us your jurisdiction and your response, because we're really looking at this from a global level. We also want to understand, is there enough clarity and guidance in your jurisdiction in terms of how you define an inspection? And I'm aware that many of you may work in multiple jurisdictions, so please let us know the difference in those. But if so, we want to know who defines what an inspection is and who provides the definition of inspection, and if not, what do you feel is lacking in relation to that? We also want to understand whether you ever undertake a tangible asset valuation with an in-person inspection, without an in-person inspection, i.e. curbside, detailed or critical. And if so, what is the asset class being valued and what is the intended use of the valuation? Because as Kim says, we can use ours for multiple purposes. Financial reporting and secured lending are just 2. We also want to understand if you ever undertake a tangible asset valuation with a partial in-person inspection, i.e. curbside, detailed or critical. This could be many factors. If you were doing a science facility or you were doing a military base, you would probably not have access to all parts. And if you are doing a partial inspection, what is the asset class being valued and what is the intended use of the valuation? And the other bit we really want to engage you on, because this will be part of a series of perspective papers, we're really trying to think how we can bring transparency and consistency to the issue. So we want to understand whether the current edition of the International Valuation Standards, where I talked you through some of the bits, provides sufficient transparency in relation to the inspection as part of the scope of work and reporting requirements. And if not, are there ways we could be more transparent? And also, we're wondering, you know, we've suggested a classification system, and we want to know whether the tangible asset valuation profession would benefit from an inspection classification to provide greater transparency and clarity for all stakeholders across all asset classes and purposes. And if so, should this inspection classification be included within IVS, or should it be set out by the relevant authorities such as your regulators or your valuation professional organizations at jurisdictional level? And the final comment is we want to know if you have any other comments in relation to inspection as it pertains to tangible assets. So that very much completes the presentation part. What we're really hoping to do is now open this up where we can actually discuss with all of you what you feel we should be doing in relation to inspection. So please feel free to ask myself or Kim any questions. We also have Sandeep, who is our vice chair, who may participate, and Ron, you're welcome to participate as well. Ron is a member of the Tangible Assets Board as well, who's kindly joined this call. So over to you, Sandeep. And
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Alex and Kim, for explaining the perspective paper, and a beautiful perspective, I should say. One thing is there, from your deliberation, the very first thing that has come to the mind of everybody, I believe everybody by now have understood that investigation as per the international valuation standard, investigation and evidence, collection of evidence and do investigation is a must, but not inspection. That is the point I will first like to stress upon, that we sometimes, mix up inspection is a must, but actually the standard says investigation and evidence are not must, in which inspection might be a part of that investigation. So if the valuer thinks that a physical inspection is not necessary, and without making an inspection, but with sufficient investigation by some other ends, and at the same time by procuring proper evidences, the valuation report can be termed as in compliance with international valuation standard. So far I understand from the very first 3 slides, it is prominent now that inspection, or specifically saying physical inspection, is not mandatory to a valuer to make his valuation report in compliance with IVS. And that is the the news, the new perspective paper, the perspective paper wants to deliver to everybody. The second point that has come up from your deliberation, from your presentation, is that when it is a mass valuation, mass, say like a mass housing, somebody has to value. It is not only financially, but also practically, it may not be required that the valuer has to do each and every housing visit and value. So in that case, definitely a sample collection is much more practical and much more beneficial for a value, not only for the client, not only for the valuer, as well as for the client. Because suppose there are thousands of buildings, you have to do the valuation, and the mandate to the valuer is to see, measure each and every building which are almost similar in character. Then what Kim has already said, that it will affect very much on the financials of the client, because every hour comes with cost. Whenever we will send a surveyor for measurement, it comes with cost. And then at the end of the day, the question is that whether it is mandatory to inspect each and every building which are almost similar in specification. The answer is no. Then why a physical inspection is a must? That question has come before the Tangible Asset Board, and the board has come to a conclusion that no, in these cases, inspection may not be a must. Unless the client want it, unless the client ready to pay for it. in that case, it might be essential and could be there within the scope of work. But in contrary, my question now to the panelist, that if the client want that I don't want a physical inspection of this tangible asset. It might be a machinery, it might be a land and building, or land and building and plant and machinery together. Whereas the valuer opines that a physical inspection is a must. Then what is the conclusion? If the valuer go by the client's requirement that I don't need a physical inspection of the properties, whether the report prepared by the valuer will be termed as in compliance with international valuation standard or not. Could you please clear it out? Because I am a little bit confused on that point.
I'll start answering, and then Kim will probably come in and correct whatever I say. But let's start off from my point of view. Yes, it's agreed by the client and the valuation, but we're very clear that it's sufficient investigation or analysis. And if I, as the valuer, really believe that the asset needs to be inspected, then yes, I can produce a valuation, but it would not be an IVS compliant one in these circumstances, because you've already given me the scenario that the valuer does not think that the valuation would be sufficient without an inspection. So that would be my very simplistic view, but I'm going to hand over to Kim to see if he wants to add more to those circumstances. So basically we're talking a client valuer disagreement. Client maybe wants it as cheap as possible and says, hey, don't worry about an inspection here, and the valuer really feels that an inspection is required. But over to you, Kim.
Yeah, Sandeep, a really good question. The first thing that I would step up over and above a client and a valuer's considerations is I would think about the regulatory requirements within that setting. So thinking about the asset class in that particular jurisdiction for that particular purpose, are there any requirements that are put upon a valuer by a regulatory body to conduct an inspection as part of the valuation? That's probably the first thing. The second thing is, if you're conducting a valuation as a valuation professional under a professional body, does that professional body, when you're signing off on that valuation, have a requirement that you do conduct an inspection? Okay, they are the two things that I think sit above the client and the valuer interaction. Beyond those two things, I think it summarises it quite succinctly on slide 6 that Alex presented before, but that is that sufficient investigation and evidence must be assembled by means such as you point out, right? Inspection, inquiry, research, computation, or analysis to ensure that the valuation is properly supported. Okay, so when determining the extent of investigations and evidence necessary, professional judgment of the valuer is required to ensure that it's fit for purpose. Okay, so there's a whole heap of things to take in there, but think regulatory setting, think about the VPO that you're doing the valuation under. Then when you're thinking about that client valuer interaction, do you think that you can assemble and conduct sufficient evidence investigations and evidence? Can you bring that to the table to do a valuation that you think will be properly supported without doing an inspection because you've actually inspected the assets 3 times prior? Indeed, you might think that you are able to do that in that particular circumstance. If you're valuing an asset that you've never seen before and you have question marks over the status of your client and you don't necessarily trust your client that you're doing the valuation for, you might think that you indeed do want to go and do an inspection of that asset as part of the valuation. So keep in mind that whenever a client comes to the table and requests a valuer to do a valuation without an inspection, it's not mandatory that the valuer must accept the instruction. Okay, they have to use their professional judgment in every circumstance and think about the overarching risk that's associated with doing such a thing. But then also, in the event that something goes wrong because they haven't conducted an inspection, thinking about how they limit or share risk as part of that valuation report with their client as part of their terms of engagement, and the limitations that they have, not only within the scope of work, but also within the body of their valuation report. So a whole host of things that I think you need to think about when thinking about a client asking you that question.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Kim, for elaborating on this matter. Yes, I believe, friends, that the answer is quite clear to you, that if that type of situation happen, that the client is instructing not to do any physical inspection of the property, but the valuer thinks that a physical inspection is a must. Even then, if the valuation is done, then the valuer should not write that the valuation is in compliance with IVS, because his professional judgment is that an inspection is must in this case, but as because the client do not want inspection, therefore he does not allow the valuer to inspect, and the valuer has done a desktop valuation report. Therefore, in that case, my dear friends, the valuation report will not be in compliance with IVS. But definitely, it's not mandatory that every evaluation report has to be an IVS compliant. If your client is ready to accept any evaluation report which is not IVS compliant, the valuer is free to do a non-IVS non-compliant valuation report. So in that case, this valuation report which falls under this category, that you must write categorically that this valuation report is not in compliance with IVS. Well, taking a clue from this jurisdiction, to all my friends here in who are practicing in this subcontinent, not only in India, rather in Bangladesh and Nepal also, what this perspective paper has said is very, very interestingly, jurisdiction is one of the main criteria that valuers should keep in their mind while doing inspection. And a point that Kim has raised, the jurisdiction in which plenty of fraud happens, transparency of documents is very rare, getting data is very difficult in those areas. Rather, the regulator as well as the VPOs, they rather mandatorily say you must go for inspection and then do the valuation. Therefore, what has been stated here in the perspective paper, that inspection, although the investigation and evidence is a mandatory, but inspection is not. But considering the situation prevailing in India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, or Nepal, or in other countries where the percentage of fraud in real estate as well as in plant and machinery is quite high, it is advisable for the valuers practicing there, go for physical inspection. That physical inspection, and you see that this time IVS has given you a series of different kinds of inspections. It might not be a detailed inspection, but definitely if you go for a curbside inspection or a roadside inspection, that means that you have been there. The inspection of a property does not mean only the measurement of the property. You have to have a feel of the surroundings of the property, neighborhood of the property. So in that case, even though you are not doing a detailed inspection, but your curbside inspection or by car you are passing by, that will also give you a feel of that property and the neighborhood. That type of inspection may be very, very essential in our subcontinent. So I would now like to make the forum open for all our participants. Right now it is more than 200 participants are there who are participating in this webinar. Now it is open up to you. I believe that all of you have gone through the perspective paper already. So if you have any question in your mind, if you have any confusion regarding the statements in the perspective paper, kindly ask the question. Our panelists are here to give you a first-hand answer. Please.
Will consider as the April.
Rahul, please make the forum open.
Can we have hands raised by anyone?
Well,
Or,
for the
anyone
persons
would like
from
to
Bangladesh, you can
introduce
ask the
themselves?
question. Rahul, for the persons participating from Bangladesh, you can ask the question in Bengali also. I can transfer it for the panelists for their answer.
Yes, we did in July August, but we did follow the April to March.
Yeah, Mr.
Because,
Srinivas, can you be a little louder?
Mr.
Mr. Srinivas, can you be a little louder?
Sandeep, they can also type the questions in the chat if they want in Bengali or English, and we can pick them up that way. So whatever way works.
Please. You start with that.
We have from Al Mamoon from Mr. Al Mamoon from Bangladesh. You have any question, please?
Rahul, you go to the chat box, see the question, and ask this on behalf of the the participant.
Yeah. Okay.
I can start with one question that's showing here. It says, can you explain curbside inspection with an example? So I'll probably hand this over to Kim, but I'll give you the caveat that a curbside inspection is not driving past an asset at 60 kilometers an hour and logging it on your GPS. But maybe, Kim, do you want to pick up that one on a curbside inspection with sort of how you would see one as being?
Yeah, Alex, look, I'll go to the wording as we've described it in the perspectives paper, but the curbside or drive-by inspection, and we've bundled them together as one, by the way, is where the valuer doesn't actually set foot on the property itself, but rather inspects the property from afar, typically either from a vehicle or from the curb. And so another word for curb is from the footpath. And so in this particular instance, whilst viewing the asset from the curb or from the road has its obvious advantage in that you actually get to see the physical nature of the asset and its surroundings, perhaps in more detail than what you might from a technology or a desktop inspection. It isn't an inspection where you would actually set foot inside the property or do an internal inspection of that particular asset. It's very much where you would view the asset from outside or from the street frontage of that particular property or asset. Hopefully, maybe the word curb is a little bit confusing. I would use footpath as an alternative way to think about that.
Sandeep, just looking at Yogesh Mehta's comment, and thank you for your comment, it seems to say not even if such limitation is specifically stated that physical access was restrained. In some instances, we can only do what is practical or what is possible. And there's many reasons why physical access may be restrained. It could be research and development. We may not be able to see certain parts because they're held secret. It could be a military base where there's certain parts that we're not given access to. It could even be, I say simply, but it's not really simple. If you're dealing with a pipeline at the bottom of the sea, you're hardly going to be able to do a deep sea dive and swim along it. Or if you're dealing with a very large acreage of plant, you might choose to use a drone instead to check all the fencing. What we are saying is at the end of the day, it's down to your professional judgment and that you should be transparent in what you've done and what you haven't done. I've had instances where I couldn't inspect part of a property, and I've stated that within my valuation report. So that should be very clear. Now, there's another question here that I'm going to hand over to Kim in a minute, because it particularly relates to plant and machinery. But I will also give you an example. Is sample inspections are valid in plant and machinery? And if yes, how much should be sample size? I mean, I would say it varies from asset to asset and depends on the valuer's professional judgment. But I mean, there's some instances. Kim's just told me that something's gone wrong with his computer, so he'll come back in a while. But I'll give you some instances. If I was looking at a car rental firm in plant equipment and infrastructure, and they had 300,000 vehicles, I am not going to go see every one of those vehicles. In fact, if I tried to do that, I would still be dealing with the instruction in 10 years' time, whatever the size of team that I've got. So it's really about being transparent and clear about what you're doing. And I would say that the sample size is very much going to vary from asset to asset. But I know that Sandeep has a lot of experience in plant equipment and infrastructure. So I don't know, Sandeep, if you want to add any clarification to what I've said.
Yeah, let me tell you, the question has come from Mr. Naresh Kumar Kakkar. Well, if you go to a chemical plant, right? If you go to a chemical plant, would it be possible to judge each and every machine and pipelines? Because when you enter into a chemical plant, it's pipes and pipes and pipes, valves and pipes and pipes. So practically it is not possible to inspect the entire plant, each and every inch of the pipe. Similarly, if you go for a process plant valuation, now mind that you are a valuer, you are not a technical evaluator. There is a difference between a valuer and a technical evaluator. A technical evaluator has to judge each and every machines, and the evaluator has to give his remarks against each and every machine. But a valuer's job is to value the plant consisting of a number of machines. Some machines might be of a very high value, some machines might be of very small value, but a large number of those type of machines are used in that machine plant. So what Alex has said is 100% correct, that it is the valuer who has to take a decision, sample of which kind of machines will take. Because for large value machines, definitely you have to make the inspections. For small value machines, if the numbers are of very high number, then you have to take some sample. And how to take sample, that also depends on your experience. If you do not have the experience of that particular industry, you have to take with you a specialist who is a specialist technocrat or a specialist engineer of that industry. He will help you to collect samples, because it is not possible for a valuer to be expert of all kinds of industry. Therefore, nowadays it is a necessity for make a valuation team while making an inspection of a large plant. That team might contains an electronics engineer, a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer who are expert in these fields and who will give their feedback to valuer so that the valuer ultimately can do the valuation. I believe that, in fact, I tried to explain your question. Now it's up to you how much you have understood. And Kim, would you please add something?
Yes, sir, please, can I speak?
Yes, Naresh, feel free to speak. Yes.
Sir, my question was around 500 locations were offered for valuation throughout India. Out of that, they want only 2 or 3 should be checked. So
No,
what should be the you done on this?
I understand what Alex has just now said and what Kim was explaining a few minutes before, that it is the judgment of the valuer, not the direction of the client. The client may ask for 2 or 3 inspection, but if the valuer thinks that at least this much of inspections are necessary, then he will or she will insist on inspection of this minimum number of samples or those minimum number of plants. Otherwise, either you have to say no, or you have to prepare the valuation report by making a comment that these are desktop valuation. You have to put sufficient limitations, and you have to put sufficient, and you have to write that this valuation report is not in compliance with international valuation standard. Thank you. Jigesh, you have raised your hand. You can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yeah, please, Jigesh ji, you can ask the question.
Yeah. Good morning, Alex, and good evening, I guess, Kim. Alex, you have handled the first question which I had raised, but the main concern was, say, for example, we have large infrastructure projects which are abandoned, and we are carrying out valuation for insolvency and bankruptcy code out here, and we are not in a position to access the site, or are we in a position to have a gross or a rough check as to whether the built-up area or the peripheral measurements are also not possible from Google Images. These are the kind of limitations or limiting conditions in which we are working out here. And so that question was specifically raised with that viewpoint. The other thing I have for Alex, say, for example, in the UK, you have RICS guidelines specifically for the glass cladding or the facade, which have now created several problems due to heat generation, due to the elevation in the buildings. We don't have anything of that sort here. Or for that matter, when we are valuing commercial or residential properties, not infrastructure projects as such. We have seen several reports in the United States which separately are home inspection reports which mention about rodent infestation, a leaking roof, or probably unsatisfactory workmanship. These are the kind of things which are probably somewhat essential for valuers to understand, because there may be a cost to cure these deficiencies in the building or the infrastructure. Such costs, if accurately estimated, to arrive at the real market value. So these are the aspects not specifically covered anywhere in the kind of standards that we are referring to back home.
No, I hear you, and if I could ask everyone to go on mute, it does make our job a little bit easier. So, I mean, first of all, we're not the only people who inspect a property. We may bring a building surveyor in. So, for example, I might look at the building. I might notice that there may be some settlement, there may be some subsidence, there may be other issues. It's very quite frequent that we might use an external specialist, such as a building surveyor, to come in and look at the potential costs of rectification. And I agree, Yogesh, that it's very important that we do that in relation to evaluation. I'm not sure if I agree with you that there are no cladding issues in all of India. I'm sure that all markets probably have some issues in relation to cladding and other bits, but yes, there's very particular requirements in the UK in relation to fire safety, which you must follow. I wanted to maybe, Kim, hopefully you're available now, and my apologies that you had difficulties. Kim, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Alex.
Brilliant. What do you think it's worth maybe answering Yiga Qatari's question? So in the case of valuation of plant equipment, wherein multiple asset classes involved, like computers, office equipment, furniture, fixtures, vehicles, etc., for which the physical inspection is not practically feasible because it takes a long time. What should be an approach? So how would you deal with that, Kim, when you've got all the fixtures and fittings and other bits? Would it be a sample? How would you deal with inspection in that case?
Yeah, Alex, look, it typically depends upon the asset class that's being valued. So, and apologies, my video doesn't appear to be working, but, the valuer in that particular space would typically, as Sandeep was alluding to, would focus on materiality of the assets at hand. And so thinking that there might be 2,000 assets that form part of a portfolio, there might be 50 or so of those assets that are actually represent in excess of 95% of the value of that valuation. And so in that particular instance, where you have a particular weighting of assets that form the material part of the value of the valuation, that should be the focus of the inspection exercise. By contrast, if we go to value something like a portfolio of Hertz and Avis cars that have 500,000 cars around the world, it's not so much about materiality, because they are very similar assets, but actually located all around the world. And so when you think about that, it's probably more around a sample inspection in some instances to understand exactly the assets that you're valuing. But then, the investigations part of the assignment, the information gathering part of the assignment, is to think about other ways that you may be able to supplement a lack of inspection for a portfolio of assets that are like that. And that might be around adherence or compliance records that are associated with assets and other associated asset data. So, it really depends upon the portfolio in question. In some cases, it might be around materiality. In other cases, it might sort of step down to more of a sample-based inspection process. But getting back to your guess's question as well, in and around valuation purpose, okay, I know you were talking about insolvency purposes. So, very much at the heart of thinking about investigations and evidence gathering as part of every valuation assignment is that valuation purpose. The perspectives paper very clearly states that, if you were to do a piece of work for litigation or dispute, for example, so a very high risk piece of work, a valuer might indeed undertake that detailed or critical inspection. I would think the purpose that you were describing there, Yogesh, was probably quite similar in terms of that insolvency or restructuring. Okay, so you really do need to have a detailed understanding of the asset and to do an investigation and or inspection process that is commensurate with the risk that's associated with the valuation.
If it's okay, Sandeep, I'd like to move to the next question. And sorry if I mispronounce the name. It's from Sajid Zakar Hafizullah Khan. And he states that desktop valuation is a single page valuation, no need for physical visit, only data provided by applicant. We as the valuer tried to do the best job for valuation. Still, is there any risk for the valuer? I mean, there's hundreds of things I can answer there. So I'm going to start there and then probably hand to Kim and Sandeep to take further. So first thing is a desktop valuation. I know it's confusing because it has the word valuation in it. It's not an IVS compliant valuation. You don't have a scope of work. You don't have all the information. Now, in the past, it was quite common practice, and I'm going back about 10, 15 years ago in the UK, and maybe it happens again, that banks would go around, ask different valuers for a desktop valuation, provide them very limited information, ask for a figure, and potentially give the instruction to the highest figure. Now, whenever I did a desktop valuation, it was full of caveats explaining that this is not a valuation. There is no liability in relation to this. The valuation may change if I get information that is different to that originally provided by the client. Because yes, from my belief, there is a liability for a valuer, but this is not an IVS compliant valuation. It would not be standard for me to inspect for a desktop valuation, but I'm probably going to hand over to Kim first, because I know these are undertaken in Australia as well, I believe, and then I'm going to hand to Son to give the local market view. And can I ask whoever's not muted, that could be Carl Mababamba, please stay muted, because it makes it very difficult for us to answer otherwise. And there's 199 people who do want to listen. So Kim, over to you.
Thanks, Alex. I would just reiterate what you just said, but we need to keep in mind that it's not mandatory for a valuer to accept an instruction. Okay. And so, thinking back again to what we were talking about before, in order to be IVS compliant, at least, the valuer needs to think about providing a credible result. And so, the acceptance of an instruction from a client isn't mandatory. And so in any particular circumstance where a client comes to you and requests or demands a certain type of valuation, well, the valuer needs to think critically through all the different levels of risk that are associated with that assignment. And so I don't think that there's a cookie cutter answer for this, other than to, think carefully about every instruction that you receive and think about it uniquely, depending upon your client and the purpose and the type of the asset, the location that it's situated, the whole raft of different things that need to be thought about as part of accepting any valuation assignment.
Sandeep, over to you, because you're going to be familiar with the situation in the actual market and how the desktop works. So let's bring you in on this.
Yes, thank you, Alex. Actually, the difference, what I presume that the difference between a desktop valuation and a detailed valuation is that you do not have to. First thing is that the valuer is not allowed to go for inspection. Any kind of inspection is not allowed. And the documents are basically supplied by the client. Even then, as a professional, when a valuer is giving his service as a professional against money, against a consideration, definitely the professional liability lies on the valuer. Now, how much risk you are taking, what Alex has already explained, that first thing is that you are to send a detailed list of information and documents that you require from your client, and check how much information or documentation has been supplied by the client. Depending on that, you write your caveats, you write your assumptions, special assumptions and limitations. But it is mandatory in this case also for a valuer. First, you have to send official information to your client that in spite of being a desktop valuation, I need to have the following documents with me. Only then the client, if not supplied the documents, your risk will be lesser and lesser. But if you do not ask any document, if you do not provide any list of documents to your client, you have only done the valuation without mentioning these, then almost 80 to 90% of the liability of the entire valuation lies on you, except visiting the site and physical inspection. So be careful in accepting this desktop valuation, and the concept is not correct that a desktop valuation report is only a single page report. In the desktop valuation report also, the valuer has to follow all the steps, all the calculation he has to explain, and all the valuation methodology he has to follow. It is not a shortest of the shortest cut method. It may be a detailed valuation report, but the valuer has to be very cautious about that, so that the liability, what liability he is carrying as a professional, must be provided in the valuation report in black and white. So it is also to be done with proper professional judgment and with proper professional due diligence. That is my opinion.
Thank you. And I'll just add to what Sandeep has very rightly said, is we also define professional skepticism. So you have a duty to look at the client information and see if it makes sense as well. Just before we jump to Yogesh, I'm not sure if that's a legacy hand or you have another question, but I'd just like to deal with a question that's quite impossible to answer. So I'm probably going to hand it to Kim quite quickly, but it is, what is the extent of detailed inspection in land and building valuation? Now, one of the issues there is obviously not every asset is the same. It's very difficult to tell without actually seeing the asset. It depends very much on the professional judgment of the valuer, and they should be aware of what extent they believe that they need to do a detailed extent for land and or building to get the accurate or best valuation result possible. But Kim, I'm handing you the impossible question. So it's a bit like, how long is a piece of string? So how would you see the extent of the detailed inspection in land and building valuation?
Well, thank you kindly, Alex, for handballing that one to me. Look again, reiterating back to the perspectives paper. Clearly the detailed inspection involves physically putting foot on the property. Now, I would also suggest that not only means that the valuation professional walks around the external periphery of the building, but they are likely to also enter inside the building if there is a building situated on that particular property. As rightly pointed out before, the inspection process may uncover things that the valuer wasn't expecting. And so upon entering that property, whilst it looked very good on the outside, it might not actually have much on the inside, and it might have been stripped of all its internals. There may be white ants or termites that are associated with the property, or indeed it might be infested with rats. And so, the extent and nature of the inspection may change when you do that physical inspection of that particular property. There may be also other things that you will do, such as take measurements and take note of conditions or condition of the property. You might actually discuss with the property owner or operator the history of the property and its operating performance. Depending upon the asset class involved, this could go off into various different branches and levels of inspection. And so I wouldn't want to put a single description of a detailed inspection there, other than to say it involves that physical location on the property, preferably definitely on an external basis, so walking around the property, but then ideally to have access to the internal of the property as well, to take whatever information gathering, I suppose, that you need to do as part of that process.
Sandeep, if I can, just before we go to Yogesh, jump to one more plant and machinery question. It states here in plant and machinery IBC cases, we cannot comment on valuation without inspection, as sometimes condition is like new and sometimes like scrap. How do you deal with that, Kim? And does it depend on the amount of plant and machinery, and you might have to use your professional judgment to take an average? But I'd just be interested how you'd respond to that.
Yeah, Alex, again, it depends upon the nature of the subject assets. If you were valuing a single asset for a high risk purpose, your level of inspection would likely form some form of detailed inspection or critical inspection. To the extent you're valuing a significantly large portfolio of assets, whereby you can do information gathering and investigations of other forms, such as gathering maintenance records or operating conditions of assets, or there might be a particular lessee that utilizes that asset and pays a rent on the basis of the fact that the asset's actually operating in accordance with how it should. There are various different ways that you can do information gathering depending upon what that portfolio looks like, and also what the nature of the assignment and the purpose of the valuation is. And so absolutely, I agree there that in a lot of cases, inspection will require to be physically at the property to consider condition. But it depends upon the nature of the asset and the purpose of the assignment, I suppose, to think about how you minimise risk as part of that valuation assignment to produce a credible valuation outcome.
And I believe our next question is from Yogesh.
Alex, sorry to interrupt. Actually, I would like to comment in this matter because it says that in plant and machinery IBC case, IBC means it is insolvency and bankruptcy case, insolvency. So actually, right now, the jurisdiction of insolvency says, according to that, the inspection is a must for insolvency cases. Because right now in India, one biggest Indian firm, valuation firm, their registration has been suspended for 6 months because they did not inspect the property but give the valuation. In plant and machinery asset class also, one valuer's registration has been suspended for 6 months only because he has not visited the plant and machinery. Even then he did the valuation, although he mentioned that he assumed or he did not visit everything. He explained or he is transparent in his report. Even then the regulator suspended his registration for 6 months. So that means that in plant and in all insolvency and bankruptcy cases in India, the regulation, the regulator and the jurisdiction says that inspection of all the assets is a must for valuer. If any valuation is done without inspection, then at any point of time, the regulator may suspend the registration of that valuer, even though the latest IVSC does not make inspection as a mandatory for a valuation report to be IVS compliant. But at the same time, do not misunderstand the IVS, because at the same time it says that jurisdiction, what jurisdiction has says, what local laws has said, it always prevail what the international valuation standard has said. So first thing is that you have to follow the local law. You have to follow your local jurisdiction, and then will come international valuation standards. So it's a mandatory for all valuations under IBC. Valuer has to make inspection. Thank you, Alex. Please.
And just before I jump to Yogesh, you almost took the words out my mouth, because obviously you have to follow the laws of where you're doing the valuation. And it states very clearly in IVS 100 valuation framework that if legal, statutory, regulatory and or other authoritative requirements appropriate for the purpose and jurisdiction of the valuation conflict with IVS, such requirements should be prioritized, explained, documented and reported in order to remain compliant with IVS. So in this case, you have IBC, who deals with insolvency and bankruptcy, and there is a regulation that you need to follow. If you don't follow that regulation, if you don't do the inspection where it's mandatory, not only will you not be complying with them, but you won't be complying with the international valuation standards either. Yogesh, thank you for having so much patience. We're now ready for you. Sorry, we just felt we should answer a few other questions. So over to you, sir.
Yeah, I have a very unique example, and to which probably Sandeep and Kim both will recall. During a panel discussion at V20, probably 6-7 months back, we had a panel discussion on inspection, right, Sandeep? And Rajiv Shah of RBISA had mentioned of a very unique example where they carried out valuation of probably 12 to 15 satellites of Indian Space Research Organization. He said they were not able to inspect even a single sample satellite as such, and still they did the executed assignment. We agree that the client would have agreed in the scope of work that none of the satellites would be available for inspection. But if this is the requirement of IVS that such a report would not be IVS compliant, I would not feel happy that signing such a report for a very prestigious client that my report is not IVS compliant. Comments on that?
So first of all, before I hand over to Sandeep and Kim, I've always wanted to go into space. So if I was the evaluator, I'd try and insist that they had to send me up in a space rocket to see the satellite. But I accept that that may not be practical. I would suggest that within IVS, we also do external specialists and service organizations. And though you may not be able to physically see the satellite, I think you could still produce a IVS compliant valuation, but I would probably want to bring in a specialist to assure me that the technology actually works and the satellite is doing the job that it should be doing, because I wouldn't be the person who would necessarily be able to do that. But I'll hand over to Kim first, and then I will hand over to Sandeep. So Kim, I don't know if you want to elaborate. Have you done many valuations of satellites in space, or how would you treat it?
I can't say I've done any valuations of satellites, but I think, Yogesh, one of the other examples that was shared at the V20 was around electrical transmission lines. Okay, so thinking about, what exactly does an inspection entail for a electrical transmission line? Does it require the inspection, a detailed inspection of all of the towers that make up 400 kilometres worth of transmission line? So I think, this is fairly well covered under inaccessible assets within the perspectives paper, in that, again, the valuer doesn't necessarily need to think about the fact, as Sandeep has alluded to, that physical inspection is the only form of investigation and evidence gathering. Okay, there are other things that the valuer can do to satisfy themselves and gather the most appropriate information for the purpose of the valuation in order to produce a credible valuation outcome. And your example there would be exactly that. And so, there are unique circumstances that are described there and inaccessible assets that are a few examples of where that might be the case.
Sandeep, do you have any more to add at this point in time?
Yeah. Just I would like to mention, once you completed your presentation, I started my explanation by telling that IVS wants investigation and evidence as must, but not inspection. Inspection may be a part of investigation and evidence, but may not be a part of investigation and evidence. As per IVS, the valuer has to make sufficient investigation and evidence, which may not include inspection. When inspection is not possible, then other evidences and by other investigations, if the valuer has been able to prove, able to come to a acceptable conclusion, then the valuation is absolutely IVS compliant. And Jigesh and Kim, you might remember that not only the valuation of satellite, our RPS man also has gave the example of Air India this plane valuation, where they have inspected only a few samples, because many planes are there in different, not only country but different continent. Then how to access all these planes? So in this case also, valuer has to understand that IVS International Valuation Standard says that investigation and evidence is a must, but not inspection. Inspection is a part of investigation and evidence where it is possible and where the jurisdiction makes it mandatory. If not, if valuer thinks that he has done sufficient investigation and collected sufficient evidence to support its valuation report without any inspection, the valuation report even then will be treated as IVS compliant. I believe that I can explain myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. I can see two other hands raised here, so maybe we go for engineer Zia first and then Mahesh Gupta. So I hope I've got that right. I hope that stands for engineer Zia. So do you have a question for us? Please feel free to ask Kim, Sandeep and myself.
You unmute yourself first.
Thank you. I am Jia, Managing Director of City Engineering Inspection Company Limited from Bangladesh. I would like to ask a question. Thanking the authority for the beautiful arrangement. The first question in Bangladesh, we don't get any hard reference on the valuer while doing the inspection. The ones we get are verbal. What is your specific advice in this regard? In this regards, the ones available in the government way are much less as per the current market value. Thank you.
I'm going to hand this over straight to Sandeep first of all, because I believe Sandeep is familiar with working in your market. And then if Kim and myself have anything to add in relation to that, we'll come in. But I'm sure Sandeep's response will be excellent. So over to you.
Thank you, Alex. What Jia wanted to know, he said that in Bangladesh, same condition is there in India and Nepal also. The evidence in the form of registered land deeds or registered sale documents is very rare. To access those registered sale deeds or sale or purchase documents or lease documents is very rare. The valuer has to depend entirely on physical inspection and on hearsay evidences. He wants to say that evidence, that whatever evidence they collected as a hearsay evidence, depending on that, they have to do the valuation. So how to come out of that situation? That is his question. Well, the come out of the situation is that what valuation, the principle says that if I understand that both in Bangladesh or in Nepal or in India, getting a registered sale deed or a sale document is very difficult. Even though if we get a registered sale deed, the difference, the market, actual market rate and the sale rate shown in the document vary to a large extent. That is why to come to a conclusion only on the basis of that registered sale deed is very difficult. But there are formulas, there are methods by which these hearsay, you have to go to the site definitely to collect the actual market rate. And then with the help of the sale deeds, maybe the sale deed might not be of the same area, maybe 5 kilometers away or maybe 2 years back. But with the help of the valuation different formulas, you can use these sale deeds to come to a conclusion which is supportive to the hearsay evidences and actual market rate. As a valuer, you have to know these, the tricks, how to convert your hearsay evidences into an IVS compliant solid evidence. That is with experience and knowledge, you could accrue these type of specialties and could become a very good value. That's it. Alex, please.
Thank you. No, nothing to add to that. I was just going to go to Mahesh has kindly typed his question. I think he's trying to set us off against each other because I wouldn't necessarily agree in his first statement, which is physical inspection in respect of tangible assets is more relevant in the case of plant and machinery valuation. Mahesh, to be honest with you, I wouldn't necessarily agree on that. There is a wide variety of tangible assets, and it depends on what you're actually valuing. And you really have to use your professional judgment to take it on a case-by-case basis. But I'll hand to Kim and Sandeep in a minute on that one. Desktop valuation should be avoided in PM valuation. I have a different definition of desktop valuation to probably a lot of you. So what I'm referring to is pre-getting the instruction from the banks. They go around to a number of firms and ask for a desktop. So they supply minimal information and ask you for what a rough idea of the value is. And in that case, it's very important that you have the appropriate caveats and limitations, as Sandeep said, where you're stating this is not a valuation, but for the purposes of this this exercise, I think the valuation would be around this. But whether you should avoid them, I don't know, because if you avoid them, the worry is that a non-valuer does them, which I think should be avoided in all circumstances. But maybe Sandeep had to hand over to you and Kim to see how both of you would treat that. And if I could ask Engineer Gia just to go mute for a minute. Thank you for your question, but we want to give other people the opportunity to hear responses to theirs as well. So Sandeep, maybe over to you and then Kim in that. So it's the last comment from Mahesh Gupta.
Yeah, actually what Mr. Gupta has said is definitely to a great extent correct, but not full, because physical inspection, you know, from the very beginning, what we are discussing, that whether an inspection is a must or is required depends absolutely on the professional judgment of the valuer. Definitely, he will take the, the owners, he will take the instruction from the client, but at the same time, the valuer will also try to tell the client that whether inspection is must or not. If the valuer finds that, well, inspection is not a must in this case, he can go by that, what the his client has said. If not, he wants to say the client that no, this case without inspection, the valuation cannot be a credible valuation. And I believe that the client is, is experienced enough to understand what his consultant is telling. And definitely what he has said that for plant and machinery valuation, definitely inspection is much more necessary, because the conditions of the building, because where life of a building is about 75 years, where many machines are there, which are electronics machine, is hardly 1 to 2 years. So in that case, the condition of the machines deteriorates very fast. So what his comment is quite correct, that physical inspection is almost necessary in case of plant and machinery. If not, what has been stated by Kim and Alex also, it's a big portfolio valuation, or what just now we are discussing. Jigas has given the example, valuation of a satellite, valuation of 3,000 number of fleet of Airbuses, which is physically. Thank you, sir.
Kim, I don't know if you want to add any more to that comment. So it's the one that's saying physical inspection in respect of tangible assets is more relevant in the cases of plant and machinery assets.
Yeah, Alex, I think, again, reiterating the jurisdictional considerations and the purpose, but we continue to circle back on the fact that, when determining the extent of investigations and evidence necessary, professional judgment is required to ensure that the valuation is fit for purpose. So, whenever we think about evaluation, no two portfolios or assets or valuation purposes are the same, or jurisdictions. And so it really needs to come on a case-by-case basis. Now, the inspection of plant and machinery can be, very important, but similarly, the inspection of real estate can also be important, but the valuer needs to consider that fact pattern and use their professional judgment as part of the consideration of every assignment.
Okay, the next question I'd like to do, and I realise that we're coming towards the end of our time. This is from Naresh Kumar Kukar. Investigation comes through records. If records are manipulated, valuations will be less accurate. Would agree with that, but there's a certain element of due diligence of the valuer as well to check how accurate the records are. In some cases, we found that most of assets were missing from the site by theft, although account books and FAR were showing it all intact. Records cannot replace inspections. There's nothing I necessarily disagree with that. I've even had other situations where I did a lot of valuations in Germany at one time, and the government helpfully provided measurements for all their assets. They had a government database, which was brilliant news, except all the measurements were incorrect. So as the valuer, I had to remeasure the assets and say, this is how it would break down according to the German measurements, and this is how it broke down to the measurements on site. In terms of, at that time, I was doing euros per square meter. But I don't know, you're probably more familiar with the situation that Naresh is talking about. So Sandeep, I don't know if you want to come in and answer this one. Thank you.
No, it's correct. What he has said is correct, and almost everything has been explained by you. I don't have anything to add. It's correct. Okay.
Thank you. So just looking through to see if there's many more questions here, and please let us know if we've missed any of your questions. It will not be intentional, but looking through, I think we've answered most of them. Asset identification is an essential part of any valuation, I would say. It's actually the first part. And for those of you not getting you confused here, but obviously we also deal with business valuation and financial instruments. And I know that in terms of business valuation, asset identification is part of the exercise that they do during their engagement. I mean, I had a situation many years ago where I was doing a cigarette factory in Serbia on behalf of Philip Morris. And during that inspection, we discovered that they owned 20 other buildings around the country, which also needed to be incorporated into the valuation. So, you know, I think it is important. Obviously, identification of assets is an extremely key part, and obviously that's one of the requirements within IVS scope of work. Just looking through with you, Sandeep and Kim, I don't think there's any questions that we've missed here. If anyone has a further question, or if you feel we've missed it, please repost it. Obviously, I would come back. There is one more question that's come up, which I'll go through in a second, but I would ask you all to participate in our survey, scan that QR code. We do want to know your thoughts in relation to inspection. We want to make sure that the views of your markets are reflected, because this is still a topic that we're investigating on. But this one is from Muniandy. Sandeep, even in the SURF-EASY Act, valuation, balance sheet and asset register for held process industries only, available with bank, as per IBA, investigation and evidence could not be executed. Based on the physical inspection, relisting the PMM could not meet the IVS inspection standard. Fair value, orderly liquidation value, not meeting bankers' expectation. Please suggest what we should do. I think the first thing I would caveat this before handing over to Sandeep is we can't comment on a particular ongoing case or instruction, as that would create a liability for us when we're not the valuer hired. But I'm sure Sandeep can happily talk generally about the issue without referring to a particular case that you're dealing with, sir. So over to you, Sandeep.
Thank you, Alec. The first thing is that as a professional, we are not here to satisfy anybody. right? We are not for the satisfaction of the client. As a professional, we have to do our professional duty correctly. Whether it will satisfy, in insolvency term, people thinks that the valuer has to do as per the satisfaction of the COC, that is committee of creditors, the bankers. The concept is not right. The valuers, a registered valuer is asked to do the valuation of the properties, the fair value, so that the committee of creditors can take a proper decision on that property. Same for the liquidation value, that the valuer, registered valuer, has to estimate the liquidation value so that the property could be sold in the market and maximizing the value of the property, so that the entire resolution process can be done efficiently and satisfactorily. But again, I am telling you, sir, and to everybody, that the job of the valuer in IVC is not to satisfy the COC or the that RP. Your job is to do the valuation following the international valuation standard by application of the valuation principles and valuation tables. You go by that, everybody will be satisfied, and at the end of the day, you will be satisfied. Thank you very much. Over to you, Alex.
Okay, I think we have hopefully answered everyone's questions. Once again, sorry to keep saying this, but please participate in the survey. We're looking to do future prospective papers in the series. We're looking to understand standard setting needs. We're also looking to consider whether we should include in future some form of classification within the IVS standards. I'll maybe just hand over to Kim just to thank everyone. Thank you all very much. Dhanyavad or Shukriya. And over to you, Kim. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add.
Yeah, no, look, just thanking Sandeep and the AARVF for welcoming us here today to talk about this really important topic. If I could just reiterate the importance of sharing some feedback and participating in the survey as part of the inspection perspectives paper, that would be fantastic in order for the Tangible Assets Board to consider feedback not only in India but all around the world in relation to this important topic. That would be brilliant. Thanks very much for participating and for all your questions. It's been fantastic.
And before I hand over to officially to Rahul for vote of thanks, I would like to have a comment from Ron, if he is still there, that how inspection is now being done in Israel during the war period. That's a very typical situation that Israel is facing. So if you can enlighten something that at the time of war, how inspection could be done by a valuer in Israel. Ron, if you are still there, please. Ron, are you there? I believe that he has left. Yeah. So Rahul,
Sandeep,
please.
Sandeep, it may be possible to learn what we've learned from Ludmila. So we also have a colleague on the Tangible Assets Board who's based in Ukraine, who unfortunately is in a very similar situation. Is she here online?
Ludmila, are you there?
Yes, she is there.
Okay.
Ludmila, do you want to?
Can you enlighten us? Can you enlighten us how we were doing valuation in Ukraine? Inspection.
While we wait for Ludmila, who
we do have Kevin from Australia as well. Kevin, if you are there, would you like to give any feedback on the session?
I think Kevin is less on the actual question. On the actual question, Sandeep, is they've obviously got to use other means. They're going to have to do more in-depth analysis. They might have to use drone technology. They're in a military situation. I would imagine that's quite difficult as well. But I mean, the main thing is they should be very clear in the scope of work and in the documentation and in their valuation report what they have done, what they have not been able to do. And if there are parts that they haven't been able to do, I would assume that they would need to include the assumptions that they've made, one of which must be that the building is still existing and has not been damaged by the effects of war. But obviously it goes beyond that because there's infrastructure issues as well. So at the end of the day, the valuer can only do the best job that they can. We're not recommending anyone that they go into a war zone to inspect a property. They have to do what is practical in that situation and make sure it's recorded within the report. I don't know, Kim, if you want to add any more to that, and you've obviously heard some of the challenges that Ron and Ludmilla have faced over the past year in relation to this.
Yeah, no, nothing more to add to that, Alex.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Alex, for this wonderful session on the perspective of IVSC on inspection. And thank you, Sandeep, sir, for moderating this session. It was a good 2-hour session. The question answers were stretched to 1 hour, which is very good. It has been an interactive session. So it's people coming from, of course, from India. Thank you, all the valuers. From Bangladesh, from Ukraine, from Israel, Australia. Thank Nepal. I thank everyone, for joining this session. It's great for even for IVSC to spread their papers. It keeps coming, and it's a good thing. People participating from all across India and globe. So thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Rahul, please announce our RVC.
Yes, that's what I got. So, this RVC, which we coined last year, 2023, we had done in Chennai. That's a real value conference. So now RVC 2.0, which has come up now, it is going to happen in the city of Joy, that is Kolkata, where Sandeep Dev sir resides. So we all are excited for every one of you. It's a 1-day session on 30th of August. It is going to be on bankers and registered valuers, which is going to be a very good session for Indian valuers. More of it you can go on realvalueconference.com, and the fees is very meager. If you go and see there, you will have a lunch and 2-time tea session. It is going to happen on an Institution of Engineers, Kolkata. So I think everybody knows about that place as well. So Sandeep sir, if you want to add a little bit about who all people are speakers who are going to come.
So actually, this is an absolutely program. It is designed on the valuation, the relationship between valuers and bankers. So 50% of the participants will be bankers, because most of the banks will be sending their officers in this conference, and the bankers will physically participate, actively participate in this as a speaker, as a participant, as a chair. So it will be a big opportunity for the registered valuers, means not only the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board registered, but also the Wealth Tax Act registered valuers, because the sessions are designed in such a manner. The first session is on secured lending, second session is on NPA. When it is an NPA valuation, only a Wealth Tax Act registered valuer can do the valuation. Third session will be on valuation of industrial properties, keeping in view of the IBC issues, and fourth session will be interaction between valuers and bankers. So I believe that it will be an exemplary session and exemplary program that we are going to have. We hope that all our friends from all parts of India, and at the same time, the Bangladesh is joining there as our international partner, and we're expecting at least 30 to 40 Bangladeshi friends will come and join here. They will share their experience, and they will test the taste of Hilsha fish, because this is going to be a rainy season and you will get the chance to taste the best of the fish in Kolkata, along with the best of the hospitality, and all the mishti doi and others is waiting for you. Please come Kolkata and enjoy the hospitality. Rahul, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandeep sir. Thank you again, all the members. Thank you, Kim and Alex, for taking out the time and taking this session. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for this session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Sandeep Deza, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much for a nice session.